Cognitive Interfaces. Chapter 1.
Philosophy, Mother of the Sciences. From tabula rasa to pre-installed code. I think, therefore I am. René Descartes. Empiricism is a philosophical theory, a current that considers experience to be the origin of our knowledge. Experience is the only valid source of knowledge, different from rationalism, which held blind trust in all criteria commanded by reason. Unlike the empiricists, who considered that the origin of our knowledge lies in experience, for the empiricists, the human mind is a blank sheet, a tabula rasa, that we gradually fill with knowledge through experience. Experience is the only criterion of truth. Human knowledge is limited by experience. The empiricists say that on certain matters, we only have relative or probable knowledge. They rely on the process of verification through the inductive method, one that obtains general conclusions from particular data. Rationalism, distinct from empiricism, considers that knowledge came from innate ideas and that therefore we could not trust the senses. The great question: where does what we know come from? Before psychology existed as a discipline, before neuroscience could map brain circuits, there was a group of thinkers who dared to formulate the most fundamental question of all: how do we know what we know? This apparently simple question unleashed one of the most important intellectual battles in the history of human thought. And what was at stake was not an abstract academic debate, it was the very definition of what it means to be human. On one side stood the rationalists, convinced that human reason contained innate truths, principles engraved in the soul before any experience. On the other side, the empiricists, equally convinced that all knowledge arrived exclusively through the senses, through lived experience. Neither knew they were debating the nature of our cognitive interfaces, those invisible filters that mediate between us and reality. From the perspective of cognitive interfaces, both sides were partially right, and both made the same error. They confused the layers of the filter with the totality of the knowing process. Tabula rasa, the mind as empty canvas. In 1690, an English philosopher published a work that would forever change our understanding of human knowledge. John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding contained a powerful image. At birth, the human mind is like a tabula rasa, a blank slate, a paper clean of all inscription. There are no innate ideas, no pre-recorded truths. Everything we will come to know, absolutely everything, will enter through a single door: experience. Let us then suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper, void of all characters, without any ideas, wrote Locke. How comes it to be furnished? Whence comes it by that vast store which the busy and boundless fancy of man has painted on it? His answer was unequivocal: from experience. From the senses that put us in contact with the external world, from inner reflection upon our own mental operations. This vision had revolutionary implications. If we are born without predetermined mental content, then there are no privileged truths accessible only to some. If everything comes from experience, then knowledge is democratically available to anyone who observes carefully. The authority of ancient texts, tradition inherited without examination, revealed truths that cannot be questioned. All of this fell under suspicion. Translated into the language of cognitive interfaces, Locke was saying that we are born without pre-installed filters. Our perceptual architecture is constructed entirely from what we live. Each experience deposits a trace on that blank paper, and the accumulation of traces gradually configures the interface through which we process the world. Hume and the limits of knowledge. David Hume took empiricism to its most radical consequences. If all knowledge comes from experience, he argued, then we must distinguish between two types of mental content: impressions, vivid and direct perceptions we have when we experience something, and ideas, weakened copies of those impressions that remain when the original experience has passed. Hume's criterion was relentless. Any idea that cannot be traced back to an original impression is suspect of being a fiction. Do you have the idea of substance, that mysterious something supposedly underlying the qualities of things? Search for the corresponding impression. You will not find it. Do you have the idea of self, that permanent entity you supposedly are through time? Search for the impression. All you will find is a bundle of perceptions in constant flux, never a stable self. But Hume's most devastating critique was against causality. We believe fire causes heat, that a moving billiard ball causes the movement of another when it strikes it. But what do we actually perceive? We see fire, we feel heat. We see one ball move, collide with another, and then we see the second one move. What we never perceive is the necessary connection between both events. Causality, Hume concluded, is not something we observe in the world. It is something our mind projects onto the world through habit and custom. This is extraordinary from the perspective of cognitive interfaces. Hume had discovered that one of the most fundamental organizers of our experience, the cause-effect relationship, is not out there in reality, but is a contribution of our mind. A filter we apply automatically, without realizing it, convinced we are perceiving something objective, when in reality, we are projecting a pattern. Rationalism, truths that precede all experience. Against this vision, rationalism offered a radically different alternative. Its greatest exponent, René Descartes, deeply distrusted the senses. The senses sometimes deceive us, he observed. We confuse dream with waking. Optical illusions show us what does not exist. How can we build solid knowledge on such unreliable foundations? Descartes proposed a radical thought experiment, methodical doubt. Doubt everything that could be doubted, until finding something absolutely indubitable. The senses deceive, rejected. I could be dreaming right now. All external reality, under suspicion. Even mathematics. What if there exists an evil genius making me err even in the simplest sums? But at the bottom of this spiral of doubt, Descartes found a firm rock. I can doubt everything, but I cannot doubt that I am doubting. And if I doubt, I think. And if I think, I exist. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This truth did not come from the senses or from external experience. It was a pure intuition of reason, self-evident. From this Archimedean point, Descartes reconstructed the edifice of knowledge. The mind, he argued, contains innate ideas, concepts that could not have come from experience because experience itself presupposes them. The idea of infinity, for example, being finite and imperfect ourselves, where could we have derived the notion of something infinite and perfect? It must be engraved in us from the origin. In terms of cognitive interfaces, Descartes maintained that we are born with certain pre-installed filters. We do not arrive in the world as blank sheets, but with a basic architecture already operative. The senses give us data, but reason, with its innate structures, is what converts that data into genuine knowledge. Two architectures of knowing. Viewed from the perspective of cognitive interfaces, both positions reveal something crucial. Both were mapping different layers of the same mental architecture. The empiricists were right that much of what we know comes from experience. Specific beliefs, cultural habits, knowledge of the particular world in which we live. All of this is acquired through sensory contact with our environment. These are the superficial layers of the interface, those that vary from person to person and from culture to culture. The rationalists were right that there exists a structure prior to all experience that makes it possible for experience to be processed as experience. Without organizing categories, without the capacity to distinguish figure from ground, without the tendency to search for causes and patterns, the torrent of sensory data would be incomprehensible noise. These are the deep layers of the interface, those we share as a species. Contemporary studies of the mind have confirmed both intuitions. We are born with perceptual and cognitive structures inherited evolutionarily. Tendencies to perceive faces, to distinguish objects, to infer intentions in other beings. But upon these innate structures are deposited layer upon layer of cultural and experiential learning. The cognitive interface is a stratified system, not a simple thing. The tree of knowledge, roots and branches. Ancient spiritual traditions intuited this complexity through their own metaphors. The symbol of the tree appears in multiple traditions as a representation of the structure of knowledge and being. The roots, invisible underground, correspond to the deepest and most universal principles, the structures that precede and make possible all particular manifestation. The trunk represents the channel through which life flows between the hidden and the visible. The branches and leaves are the particular manifestations, diverse, changing with the seasons. We can read the debate between rationalists and empiricists through this image. The rationalists look toward the roots, what is permanent, universal, foundational in human knowledge. The empiricists looked toward the leaves. How does the mind fill with specific content through its contact with the world? Both were looking at the same tree, each focused on different parts of its structure. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, suggests that patterns repeat at different scales. Individual cognitive interfaces reflect collective structures. Collective structures resonate with broader cosmic patterns. Knowledge is not simply accumulation of data, but participation in an intelligence operating at multiple levels simultaneously. Implications for personal transformation. What does this debate tell us about the work of inner transformation? Much more than appears at first glance. If the empiricists are right that experience forms the mind, then the experiences we choose to have, or dare to seek, literally shape us. Every book read, every deep conversation, every journey to unknown territories deposits new contents in our cognitive interface. Transformation requires deliberately exposing ourselves to experiences that expand the limits of the known. If the rationalists are right that there are innate structures, then there exists within us a wisdom deeper than cultural learning. Moments of profound intuition, truths we recognize without being able to explain how we know them, the sense of the sacred that crosses all cultures. All of this points toward layers of the interface that precede our personal history. Contemplative practice works with both dimensions. On one hand, it teaches us to question acquired beliefs, to recognize the experiential filters we have absorbed without examination. On the other, it invites us to connect with something deeper than those superficial layers, consciousness itself that makes all knowledge possible, the light that illuminates all mental contents without being any of them. The observer behind the method. There is something neither empiricists nor rationalists could see clearly, that both sensory experience and pure reason are activities of a consciousness that precedes them both. The senses register, reason processes, but who or what is conscious of that registering and that processing? Descartes arrived at the cogito, I think, therefore I am, but did not go further. He did not ask, what is that which is conscious of thought? Is it thought itself, or is there something that observes thought without being identical to it? Mystics of all traditions point toward this distinction. There is a silent witness, an observing presence, that remains immutable while thoughts and perceptions flow. This presence is not another mental content. It is the space where all contents appear. It is not another cognitive interface. It is that which makes all interfaces possible. Recognizing it does not eliminate the filters or make them unnecessary. We still need them to function in the world, but the relationship changes. We cease to be exclusively identified with our filters and begin to inhabit the larger space that contains them. The living synthesis. Philosophy was called Mother of the Sciences because all particular disciplines were born from her womb. Physics, psychology, biology, all began as philosophical questions before developing their own specialized methods. But perhaps philosophy is also mother of something more personal. It is the origin of the question about ourselves, about how we know, about what we are. The debate between empiricists and rationalists was not a combat to determine a winner. It was an exploration from different angles of the same fundamental question: how is knowledge possible? Each position illuminated aspects the other overlooked. Together, they mapped different layers of human cognitive architecture. Today, we can integrate their intuitions. We are born with innate structures that organize experience. Those structures are filled with specific content through contact with the world. Upon both layers are deposited cultural and familial programming, and all of this is observed by a consciousness that cannot be reduced to any of its particular manifestations. The cognitive interface is not simply a tabula rasa that experience writes upon, nor a rigid system of innate ideas that experience merely exemplifies. It is a dynamic, stratified, evolutionary system. Ancient roots and new leaves, inherited structures and fresh learning, unconscious filters and moments of lucidity where the filter becomes transparent. The work of self-knowledge consists of mapping this system in ourselves, identifying which beliefs come from experience and which from deeper structures, recognizing where the filters serve us and where they limit us, and eventually touching that space of pure consciousness that remains immutable while the layers of the interface change, refine, evolve. Because in the end, the question, how do we know, inevitably leads to another, deeper one, who knows? And that question, answered not with concepts but with direct experience, is the door to the cognitive freedom we seek.